again and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for clicking on this video. And if you're not, welcome back. Please remember to leave a like and subscribe if you have not done so already, because it's a free way that you can help me out. Today, we will be covering the case of Nannie Doss. On the outside, she looked like a friendly and happy neighbor, caring wife and parent, but on the inside lurked something dark that was overlooked for many, many years. Nancy Hazel was born on 4 November 1904 in Blue Mountain, Alabama, to parents James and Lou Hazel, who were farmers. However, there is evidence that Nancy was conceived illegitimately and that James might have not been her biological father. A census was done after Nancy had been born that showed that she and her mom were living alone at the time. It is said that Lou and James had met when Nancy was around a month old, and he proposed to her after only 2 weeks of knowing each other, and they soon got married. The couple went on to have another 3 daughters and 1 son together. Nannie, as she was fondly known, did not have a very happy childhood. Both Nannie and her mother disliked James, who was a strict and often controlling father and husband, with a nasty and abusive streak, and didn't care whether he hit the kids or his wife when he didn't get his way. James was cheap and didn't want to hire farmhands, so instead he had his wife and kids help him on the farm. And because he was the boss, she had to from an early age cut wood, plow the fields, and clear the lands of weeds and debris. Nannie also had to take care of her younger siblings, as her mom was out on the farm most of the day and was not able to tend to them as she should because James expected her on the lands day in and day out. Nancy also struggled in school because attendance had been so erratic, because if James decided it was a day that she had to be on the farm, she wasn't allowed to go to school, because it interfered with her main priority of working the farm. But the work didn't just end on the lands. The Hazel house's lights stayed on very late some nights because the kids had to also attend to cleaning the house and then get up again at the crack of dawn to prepare breakfast and work on the farmlands from the first light of day. With all this, Nannie decided to drop out of school completely after 6th grade. And of course, she didn't receive pushback from her parents. When Nannie was around 7 years old, the family was on a train on their way to visit relatives in southern Alabama when the train suddenly came to a violent full stop, and she hit her head against the metal bar in front of her. For years after this incident, Nannie suffered with severe migraines, blackouts, and depression. The family often woke to her screaming in pain from her migraines, and when her mom wanted to take her to a doctor to get her looked at, her father said that they couldn't afford paying the doctor or lose Nannie's labor on the farm. So Nannie just went on suffering, and her father didn't care. Although her blackouts stopped after a while, the migraines never went away, and she had terrible mood swings throughout her life. The Hazel sisters' teenage years were extremely restricted by their father, who forbade them to have friends, wear makeup, or any clothing that he deemed attractive. He also forbade them to go to dances or any other social events. He said that when the time came, he would choose their husbands and they didn't need to go out tempting men to get them to marry them. Nannie's one escape from this life was reading her mother's romance magazines, especially the Lonely Hearts column, and fantasizing about the romances she might have in the future that would take her away from her terrible home life. That want of the perfect love turned her into a little rebel. She started to sneak away here and there, and learned that if the hayloft or the corn crib was the only place to please the boys and get a little loving herself away from her father's eyes, then she would do just that. The boys liked Nancy. She had dark hair and dark eyes, and her giggle was bright. Plus, she gave it away very easily. Lou might have known of her daughter's escapades, but she had kept quiet about it. Her thoughts were that if Nannie had to end up with child, then at least she would be able to do something that she had been unable to do for all those years: get away from James. Nannie first got married in 1921 when she was only 16 years old to a boy around the same age named Charlie Braggs, who she met at the linen thread factory where they both worked. He was the only son of his unmarried mother that he took care of. Nannie's father approved of Charlie, especially because he took care of his mother, and felt like it was something that set him apart from all the other boys wanting Nannie's attention. And within 4 months of bringing him home for supper one casual day, Nannie found herself walking down the aisle, whether she liked it or not. Nannie thought that by marrying she would escape the controlling ways of her father, but her new mother-in-law was almost just as controlling and verbally and mentally abusive as her father. She criticized everything that Nannie did and acted like Nannie knew just about nothing. But whenever Nannie complained to Charlie, her mother-in-law acted like she didn't know what she was talking about, and he always chose his mother's side. When Nannie wanted to go out and spend time alone with Charlie, his mother would contract a dizzy spell or a stomach cramp until her son was forced to relent and the couple stayed in. If Nannie wanted to attend a picture show and Mrs. Braggs didn't, the symptoms would return and they'd spend the evening at home playing mahjong at the kitchen table. The couple had 4 daughters together over a 4-year period between 1923 and 1927. Nannie had been dealing with a lot: pressures from raising babies, pleasing Mother Braggs, and cooking 4-course meals for her husband whilst tending to the house. So she asked that her mother come stay to help with the kids for a while, but her mother-in-law refused. Under a lot of stress, Nannie soon started casually drinking and smoking, but that soon turned into a habit and a heavy addiction. Their marriage was an unhappy one, and both suspected each other, correctly so, of infidelity. Charlie often disappeared for days on end, and Nannie would find her own ways of stepping outside the marriage when he was gone. Between her pregnancies, she found time to seek pleasures in Blue Mountain's assorted gin mills, where drunken men poured at her and made her feel like she was still attractive. In early 1927, they lost 2 of their middle daughters to suspected food poisoning from porridge grains. The 2 deaths had never been looked at as being suspicious, but it did not sit right with Charlie. He suspected that Nannie had killed their kids. He was worried about the safety of their eldest daughter Malvina, who was said to be Nannie's favorite, and their newborn Florine. But he had no idea how to take care of a newborn, so he decided to take eldest daughter Malvina with him, leaving Florine with her mother behind, and fled. With no husband around and the little bit of money he left her dwindling fast, Nannie took a job in a cotton mill to support Florine, herself, and her mother-in-law. But she wasn't keeping up with things the way that she wanted, and pretty soon her mother-in-law also met her demise after suffering with stomach issues. Her death, however, did not raise any suspicions. It just made people feel even more sorry for Nannie. Her 2 kids died. Her husband left her with his mother and newborn, fleeing with their eldest, and now her mother-in-law also passed. Poor thing. And even after his mother passes, Charlie still does not return. How did she cope? Charlie, however, did not stay away forever. He returned with Malvina in the summer of 1928. But they were not alone. With them was his new girlfriend, a divorcee with her own child. The idea was to drive Nannie out of the house, having realized that he didn't have to pay rent somewhere else to stay with his new mistress, since he had a house that he owns already. He thought that he would have to put up a fight to get Nanny out, but she was quite happy to go, but she would not be leaving her kids with him, so she took her daughters and returned to her family's farm. The divorce was finalized in 1929, and Charlie had always maintained he left her because he was frightened of her, and he always made sure to never take a drink or food from her when she was in a foul mood. As soon as Nanny returned, her father went back to his old ways, wanting her to work on the farm like a slave for no payment, and to give up her job at the cotton mill to help the family. But she was not having it. She was making good money at her new job, and not only that, she was newly divorced and was getting a lot of attention from men on the job. But she was not going to repeat the mistake of just marrying the first person to give her attention. She was going to take her time and weed them out until she found the best fit. She also resumed poring over the Lonely Hearts column, looking for her perfect love, and decided to start writing some of the men advertising there. Nanny responded to every advert that piqued her interest and started corresponding with numerous men over the next year. In 1929, a year after she moved out from the house she shared with Charlie, a particular advert interested her from a man named Robert Frank Harrelson, a 23-year-old factory worker from Jacksonville. She didn't like only his advert, but also the way he looked, saying that he looked to her like a movie star. She sent him a letter telling him just how much she liked his advert and attached a photo of herself. He responded by sending her romantic poetry, and she sent him a cake. That was it for him. He was smitten. He decided that he was not even going to respond. He just took down her address and went straight to her house, and they started dating. It didn't take long for them to feel like they were meant for each other, and after only 2 months, they got married. Her parents did not support the marriage, however, because number one, Frank did not ask them for permission to marry their daughter, and number two, they had also started spending so much time with Florine and Malvina since Nanny was working, and they were taking care of them most of the time, that now that Nanny and Frank would be moving to Jacksonville, it would mean that they would no longer have a standing relationship with the kids. So they didn't attend the wedding. Nonetheless, Frank and Nanny got married and moved to Jacksonville with her 2 daughters, Malvina and Florine. Things seemed to be going good between them. Frank didn't have the best paying job, but they were stable enough. He seemed to be a doting husband, complimenting her regularly and showering her with gifts. The one thing that she did have an issue was with that he drank often, and when he drank a lot, which took her back to her first marriage, where she was the one to drink to escape her unhappiness, and it made her wonder whether he felt the same thing as she was feeling then. But he assured her that he was definitely not unhappy, he just enjoyed having a good time. She also found out that he had spent time in prison for assault. Pretty soon, it turned into Frank going out nightly and getting drunk all the time. Cops would show up at their door a couple of times every week to tell Nanny that he was in jail again for getting into a fight after he was obliteratingly drunk, and she had to be the one to fetch him. Life, however, went on. Strangely, Nanny stayed for many years. Her husband's drinking rarely let up, but she stayed. He even hit her in his most drunken state, but she still stayed. He'd yell at her and threaten her kids for nothing, but she stayed. Their marriage would last 16 years. Their house turned into a toxic place for her daughters to grow up, almost like history repeating itself with Nanny's childhood. and her daughters also started repeating her own patterns, looking for any opportunity to find a husband to take them away from their home life. In 1942, Nannie's oldest daughter Malvina met a man by the name of Mosey Haynes, and they got married pretty soon after meeting. She fell pregnant pretty much immediately after the wedding, and in 1943 she gave birth to a boy that they named Robert Lee Haynes. Soon after giving birth to Robert, she fell pregnant again, and Nannie was not very happy about this. She did not want to see her child follow in the same footsteps as her. But what could she do? It was Malvina's life. She just had to sit by and accept it. Or did she? So the time comes for Malvina to give birth, and it was a difficult birth. She was struggling. She kept asking for her mother, so Nannie was called and came to her daughter's bedside at the local hospital. Like a good mother, Nannie remained on duty throughout the night, wiping her daughter's forehead, comforting her during the ordeal. She ordered Mosey to fetch glasses of water, wet towels, and anything else that she thought her daughter might need. She also kept the attending nurses and interns running around from dusk to dawn. Mosey, of course, didn't complain. He just appreciated his mother-in-law's help. And like a good grandmother, after many long, painful hours of labor, Nannie celebrated with her daughter and son-in-law when Malvina gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The doctor and nurses left the room, leaving Malvina, Nannie, and Mosey alone with the new baby. Mosey stepped out for a while, emotional, to catch some fresh air. And when the doctor and nurse returned after about an hour, they saw Nannie holding the baby, with a look of grief on her face. When they looked at her and asked her what was wrong, she was holding the baby and said that the baby had died. The doctors could not come up with an explanation for the death, but presumed that she had been deprived of oxygen because of the difficult birth, and it might have been something that they did not pick up on. Malvina, exhausted from labor and groggy from pain medication, was unclear about what was going on, but thought that she saw her mother stick a hat pin into the baby's head. But she wasn't sure whether what she was seeing was the truth or a nightmare. Back at home, a few days later, this dream kept bothering Malvina, especially since the doctors couldn't come up with a reason for her daughter's death. So she told her husband and her sister Florine about what she thought she had seen. They were both startled because they had seen Nannie toying with a hat pin, looking off into the distance earlier that night. They both thought it too much of a horrendous thing to think that their mother could do such a thing, and pushed it off to the side. After this tragedy, sadly Malvina and Mosey started drifting apart, and they both started seeking attention outside the marriage. Malvina started seeing a soldier and openly carrying out this affair, and Nannie especially disapproved, again projecting onto her daughter her own past, and not wanting her to make the same mistakes that she did. Nannie voiced this discontent of the relationship with Malvina, and it caused a major rift between the two. Malvina didn't want to take her mother's advice. She felt like her husband was already carrying on affairs with several women outside the marriage, so why should she not do the same then? And it was during a particularly bad fight between Malvina and Mosey that she decided to go and stay with her father that she dropped Robert off with Nannie. Nannie and Malvina had a nasty fight and accusations were thrown around, with Malvina saying that it was her mother's fault that she was in that situation in the first place, as she had no other choice but to try and escape the toxic house that she grew up in with her and Frank, leaving the house and leaving her mother with those parting words and Robert in her care. But What she did not suspect was that she would never see her son Robert again. He died mysteriously under Nannie's care on July 7, 1945. The cause of the death was diagnosed as asphyxia from unknown causes, and no investigation was done into his death. Again, Malvina and Florine felt like something was off, but thought it too much of a horrendous thing to think that their mother could do such a thing, and pushed their suspicions off to the side. Besides, Nannie seemed heartbroken. She didn't know what happened, and she played the grieving grandmother right up to the end as she wailed and fainted as they lowered his coffin into the ground. Then, several months later, she collected a $500 life insurance check on a policy that she had taken out on his life. But they were not the only ones that were a little suspicious of Nannie. Frank, yes, he was still around by that point, felt like he would be the next one to go, and even mentioned it in passing to Malvina and Florine at Robert's funeral. I'm not sure whether Robert's death brought Malvina and Mosey back together, but they did have 2 more daughters together named Janice and Peggy Lou. In 1945, Japan surrendered to the Allied powers at the end of World War II, and Frank was one of the many people who celebrated rather robustly. After an evening of particularly heavy drinking, he came home and wanted some hanky-panky. When Nannie refused, he slammed the wall with his fist and shouted, "If you don't listen to me, woman, I ain't gonna be here next week." So she gave in, just to avoid a broken jaw. This was the last straw for her. It had been 16 years of dealing with this drunkenness and what it led to. She had enough. The following day, 16 September 1945, as she was tending to her rose garden, she discovered his homemade corn whiskey jar hidden in the garden. This just boiled her blood even more. It wasn't enough for him to go out and get drunk every day. He also had booze hidden away in the garden. So she went in to get some rat poison, put some in his whiskey, and put it back where she found it. That would teach him a lesson, she thought to herself. And Frank, being Frank, couldn't stay away from his booze, so he went out that very same night to drink from his hidden bottle of whiskey, and died a very painful death out in the yard by the roses, whiskey bottle in hand. Everyone in town knew Frank had a drinking problem. So when Nannie phoned the police to tell them that she had found him in the yard and that he had drank himself to death, they didn't suspect any foul play and chalked it up to exactly what Nannie explained, Frank finally drinking himself to death. Nannie had received a sizable payout after his death, which meant that she would be able to live independently for the first time in her life. So she decided to invest in a property of her own. There is a brief period in Nannie's life that is unaccounted for after this. It is believed that she traveled around the country by rail, possibly north to New York or west to as far as Idaho. What she did on these excursions is anyone's guess. But she got lonely pretty soon and went back to her old ways of looking for a suitor in the Lonely Hearts column. Scouring the Lonely Hearts column, she came across a man named Arlie Lanning in 1947. Successful, unwed, no children, no baggage, she thought to herself. The only thing was that he lived in Lexington, North Carolina. So she thought, okay, let me just hop on a train and go meet him. And he was immediately drawn in by Nannie's charm and charisma. So he proposed on the spot. She said yes, went back home, packed up her stuff, and came back to Lexington. And the two were married within 3 days of meeting, not knowing each other one bit. Ollie turned out to be a combination of his two predecessors, Charlie and Frank. He liked both having affairs and drinking. However, this time Nannie didn't try to change him. Whenever things got hectic, whenever Ollie drank too much and flirted too much, Nannie pulled the suitcase from her closet and just left. Sometimes for weeks on end. So the couple would go through periods of this behavior, and then reconciling, and then Nannie would play the doting housewife until the cycle started up again. At night, she would read her monthly true romance or a novel she had picked up at the community rummage sale. Her vocabulary was minimal, and she couldn't read well, so the books she chose to read were basic. But during this time, a new love came into her life: television. That modern new wonder box that brought love stories right into her home. And when a love story was to be aired, no one dared to bother her. She would pull up her most comfortable chair, her pack of Camels, the ashtray, and lose herself in a kaleidoscope of heartthrobs and kisses. In Lexington, Nannie became an avid churchgoer, and she had gotten to know the town's folks through church. During his sober periods, Ollie would attend church with her, but there were whispers among the people of his reputation. He would regularly be seen in the lower Lexington dive bars with one of his mistresses by his side. He was not a good man, they thought, and they felt sorry for poor Nannie. Behind closed doors, in the quiet confines of their homes, he was the town's villain, and she was the martyr. And after about 5 years of this repetitive cycle, in 1952, Nannie had become sick and tired of this same old cycle, and on one of their reconciliation periods, playing the doting housewife on February 16, 1952, she made him a bowl of stewed prunes and a cup of coffee, and he would never see the light of day again. This time, the coroner put it down to heart failure. Of course, there was something that had to have caused the heart to fail, the doctor said, but in cases like Ollie's, where there was absolutely no reason for suspicion, it would be superfluous to conduct an autopsy. Most likely, it had been the dangerous flu virus that had been sweeping the state, striking some people worse than others. He had all the symptoms: sweating, vomiting, dizziness, and after all, the doctor admitted, Ollie's body was not in the best shape. His stomach already had half gone with drinking, and his heart was already weakened. Just about the whole town turned up for his funeral in support of Nannie. Ollie's will had not been updated since they were married, and the house that they were living in ended up being left to his sister. Of course, Nannie was not happy with this and expected the sister to just say, "Oh, sorry, I understand that he didn't update the will. Here you go, here's your house." But the sister was all too happy to take the house from Nannie. And surprise, surprise, not long after, the house burned down, before his sister could take ownership. But conveniently, Nannie and her things had already been moved out. And as it happened, the insurance check was made out to none other than Nannie, which she took and she quickly banked it. Ollie's mother was a bit suspicious about the whole situation and started voicing her suspicions to her friends in town. Nannie didn't like this, as others now started looking at her with the same suspicions. So soon after, Ollie's mother started getting sick with the suspected flu. And Nannie, being the caring daughter-in-law that she was there to take care of her in her time of need. But sadly, the sickly old woman passed away in her sleep. Again, no one suspected Nannie. It must just have been the terrible flu going around, they thought to themselves. So Nannie thought to herself, With this person out of the way, she would leave North Carolina. And luckily, she had a reason. She heard that her sister Davy had been sick. What better reason to leave after your husband had just died, your mother-in-law had just died, and your house had suspiciously burnt down to the ground? You would then be able to throw suspicion off you and go and willingly take care of your sick family member in need. So, Nurse Nannie came to the rescue of her sick sister Davy, who was bedridden. But she seemed to just get worse after Nannie's arrival, and a week later, she too died in her sleep. After Arlie's death, Nannie soon got lonely again, but this time she joined the Diamond Circle Club. To be a member of this club, you paid a $15 subscription fee per annum, and she thought that this would mean she would gain a better quality man than the previous husbands that she had had. Suitors and ladies received a monthly newsletter announcing the newest members and their heart's desires, and Nannie was hooked. 48-year-old Nannie found that she didn't turn heads the way that she used to when she was younger, and decided that maybe the time had come to seek the admiration in the eyes of an older male. And then she met recently retired 69-year-old Richard L. Morton from Emporia, Kansas. Richard was very taken with her and decided immediately that she was it for him. And to prove it to her, he wrote the Diamond Circle Club, asking them to delete his and Nannie's names from the availability list and thanking them for introducing him to the sweetest and most wonderful woman that he had ever met. They wed in October 1952, just a few months after Arlie's death, and she moved into his little home in Emporia. He liked to shower her with gifts, never seemingly worried about the price of anything that he gave her. At first, he stayed home, but he started venturing off into town for errands, and started staying away longer and longer. And when he was asked why, he said, "Oh, I just dawdled around." Reality, however, would soon show its ugly head. Within months of their marriage, she found out that he was deep in debt, and she soon found out why. Because every time he bought her something on whatever credit he managed to get, he also bought a double for another girl he stashed away in town. She found out that he had been seeing someone else before her, and he had no intention of leaving this woman behind after he married her. Nannie's mother came to live with him in January 1953 after her father had passed, and Nannie was so consumed with caring for her mother that Richard took advantage of this and started spending just about every night away from home. Within a few weeks of living with the couple, Lou started complaining of severe stomach pains, and soon after she died. This meant Nannie now had a lot of time to focus on Richard. Soon, she started to notice just how much time he had been spending away from home. But she did not try and interfere. She let him continue and started looking for other suitors in the Diamond Club, writing to those that piqued her interest. And only around 3 months after her mother's death, Richard also died after drinking a flask of coffee that she had prepared for him. No one again questioned it, because remember, she was now in Kansas, so no one there knew of anything that happened in her past, and Richard had been of an older age. So Nannie was already looking at potential new husbands, even before Richard's death. And that's when she met Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma, who had sadly lost his entire family in a tornado. He was a clean-cut church-going man, who was also the preacher at his church. Samuel was very much by the book. He didn't chase women, he never smoked, never drank, and refused to play dice and wouldn't as much as say one swear word. He was careful about his appearance, thrifty with his bank account, loved nature, and saw the good in almost everything and everyone. She married Samuel in July of 1954. He had been so different to her previous husbands. There was no way that he would be out drinking all night or having extramarital affairs, and he also wasn't even slightly abusive. But Nannie was still not happy with the relationship. She found him boring and set in his ways that irritated his less than conservative wife. For example, he did not allow non-educational, non-enlightening TV shows and magazines in the house, and disliked the romance novels and stories that his wife adored. He was also very frugal and limited usage of the fan and lights. He was also very set in his ways of having his whole day planned out, having to get up at a specific time, eating at specific times, etc. Everything had to be marked down at specific times on a calendar. Nannie decided that it was too much for her to handle and went back home to Alabama for a period of time. The moment she escaped, he was asking her to come back, sending her letters pleading forgiveness. And when she continued to refuse to come back, saying that he still controlled her and controlled the finances, he rearranged his banking accounts to give her equal liberty. And he took out 2 life insurance policies naming her the beneficiary. So she came back, and he soon started getting sick. In September of 1954, it got so bad that he was admitted to the hospital with flu-like symptoms and severe stomach pains. The hospital diagnosed him with a severe digestive tract infection, for which he was treated for about 23 days in hospital. And once they felt like he was recovered enough, he was released on October the 5th. That night, Nannie prepared a full meal for him of stuffed pork roast, some potatoes, and the same nightly coffee that she made him. She put him to bed, telling him that he needed to rest up so he could heal and feel like himself again. But only a few hours later, the ambulances would be called, and Samuel would be dead. The sudden death alerted his doctor, who was worried that he might have a new strain of illness that they might have missed that might spread and kill others. So he asked Nannie whether they could do an autopsy. She obviously did not want to look suspicious and had no choice but to agree. So the autopsy was done, and wouldn't you know it, it revealed a huge amount of arsenic in his system, enough to kill about 10 horses. They immediately notified the police. Nannie was of course brought in for questioning, but she stated, "How could such a thing happen? My conscience is clear." So, of course, the police could not immediately blame Samuel's death on her, but after some more investigation and digging into her past, Nannie was arrested on 26 November 1954. Nannie faced her interrogators with calmness and composure when she was arrested. She laughed at the accusation of murdering her current husband and what they had thought at the time her husband before him, stating, "My conscience is clear. I married these men because I love them. I have never poisoned anyone." She told them that she had read a lot of love story magazines and that her favorite television programs are of amour, not love, but amour. She favored the sophisticated sound of the word. She also said, "I'm sure I'll find my perfect mate yet." All through the night and into the early morning, in 2-man teams, detectives questioned Nannie. The smiling granny never once lost her composure and wore out 4 teams of detectives before they gave up for the night. Newspapers and wire services had spread the word that Nannie Doss was being questioned in at least 1 and possibly 2 deaths caused by poisoning. By sunrise, the Oklahoma police phone was jumping off the hook. More evidence was pouring in by the second against Nannie. Stories of other men that she had been married to who had met untimely deaths, the death of her sister while in her care, the mysterious death of 2 of her young daughters, the death of her mother-in-law, the death of her grandchildren, and even the death of her own mother was being questioned. This story began to grow hour by hour in length and horror. Once again the next morning, the interrogation began. This time, the investigators were armed with more evidence against her. And to try and get her to confess, they stated that they would take the death penalty off the table. And sometime during the next 7 hours, she faltered. And at times, a self-conscious giggle would erupt. And afterward, a small admission would follow, gaining her the nickname the Jolly Widow and the Giggling Granny. She was caught in her first lie when she was asked about Richard Morton, saying that she had never heard of the man, and when police produced proof of them knowing each other, she confessed with a coy giggle, "Well, I guess I wasn't telling the truth. I was married to him." After this slip-up, she started to weaken, and after more prodding, she finally admitted that she had poisoned Samuel Doss, saying that he started annoying her pretty soon after they got married, quoting Doss telling her, "I've been a Christian man all my life, and you going to be a Christian woman. You don't need a radio and television," which she said got on her nerves so bad. She said he was as mean as ever when he returned from hospital, so she put an inch of rat poison in his coffee. She apparently overestimated the dose, causing him to rage so violently that it saved his life. Afterwards, she was nursing him back to health and reportedly stated that he was just back to his mean old self, so she again poisoned his food, which is what ultimately caused his death. After Nannie signed the confession, her final words on Doss were, "Now my conscience is clear." But the investigators would not stop just there and began the task of leading her into more admissions. She would admit something but then back off on a minor detail. After a long period of questioning, she admitted to having poisoned 4th husband Richard Morton in 1953 as well. Her reason for his death: "He had been making me mad, shining up to other women." After she signed this confession, once again, she stated, "Now my conscience is clear." The expectant officers were disappointed when Nannie didn't just open up to them with everything that she did. She continued to fight admitting things she did until they trapped her into a new confession, which brought about the confession of the murder of husband number 3, Arlie Lanning, in 1952. Of him, she said, "He was a womanizer. He started running with other women," and soon after confessed to murdering him with poison as well, again signing the confession and stating, "Now my conscience is clear." The investigators then gently led Nannie into discussion of Frank Harrelson, husband number 2. Nannie stated she married him for love, but that she was disappointed. "I found out that he was a jailbird and a drunkard." She explained to them that she got this whiskey bottle to pour poison into because she just wanted to teach him a lesson, but by the next morning the bottle was empty and he was dead. When the investigator asked her, "How's your conscience now?" she replied, "Clear." After this final confession of Frank, no amount of prodding could evoke any more confessions from her. Her soft reply was, "You can dig up all the graves in the world and you won't get anything more on me." When she was asked about grandson Robert that was in her care when he passed, she said it was possible that he might have gotten hold of some rat poison, but she definitely did not poison him. So digging up the graves would be exactly what they did, and the exhumation of more bodies proved that the deaths had been from arsenic poisoning. Belated autopsies of her mother, who died also in 1953, and her sister, who passed in 1950, both had massive amounts of arsenic in their systems, but no more confessions were forthcoming from Nannie. She was adamant that she only poisoned people who deserved it and that the deaths of her other relatives were not because of her. Little did authorities know, but Nannie was already corresponding with a man who she desired as husband number 6, John H. Keel, a 60-year-old milkman from Goldsboro, North Carolina, who she had been exchanging letters with for some time. Detectives contacted him after everything, and he stated, "I'm mighty proud I didn't meet her, and she didn't come down here. From now on, I am through with these women who make their matches by mail." When asked what she thought they should do with her for poisoning all those people, "Why, anything you like," she answered calmly. "Anything they do is perfectly all right with me." Although Nannie confessed to killing 4 of her husbands, and with the arsenic found in several other family members, the state of Oklahoma centered its case only on Samuel Doss. The prosecution found him mentally fit for trial, and Nannie pleaded guilty on May 17, 1955. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, as the state did not pursue the death penalty due to her gender. She was never charged with the other deaths. "Take it easy. Don't worry. I'm not guilty," she told her daughter as she was taken away to prison. Here's an interview that was done with Nannie in 1958 while she was at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary.
How many girls are in the women's side at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary?
There's 31 on my side and 26 on the colored side.
Do all the girls call you Nannie?
Most of them calls me Mama.
Mom?
Yes, sir.
May I call you Nannie?
That's right.
Where were you born, Nannie?
I was born in Alabama. Anderson.
Did you have a large family?
I had 4 sisters and a brother.
Were you rich?
No, sir. Farmer.
Did you work in the field?
Yes, sir.
How long?
All my life.
How old were you when you first got married?
16.
And how many times were you married?
5.
Why are you in the penitentiary now?
Oh, the claims I killed my husband.
Which, your last husband?
Yes, sir.
Did they say you killed any more?
Yes,
There's
sir.
your other husband? Which other?
3 of them.
Did you?
No, sir.
How did they say you claimed they say you killed her?
They claimed I poisoned them.
But you say you didn't poison them?
I didn't.
At the time you were convicted, was there a lot of talk in the newspapers about that conviction?
Yes, sir.
What did they say about it?
Oh, they said all kinds of nasty things.
Do you think they were right?
No, sir.
Do you still maintain that you did not poison either your last husband or anybody else?
I certainly do.
Nannie, what would you like to have more than anything else in the world?
Well, my freedom first. And the next, I like a small TV for my room.
You like to watch television?
Yes, sir.
What do you like to see?
Well, I like to see a good story. I like singing and good singing.
You mean preaching?
Yes, sir.
Do you listen to preaching sermons within the prison wall?
Yes, sir.
About music?
I listen to all kind of music.
What kind do you
I enjoy
like?
music. Well, I really like hillbilly music.
How about this rock and roll Elvis Presley music you like?
Well, I don't feel very much about it myself.
How about the younger girls over there today?
They enjoy it very much.
Getting back to the reason you were convicted, who do you blame for that?
Myself.
Why?
Well, I didn't know anything about it, and never the attorney told me to go down and plead guilty. I just did.
Do you think it's valuable for people to have some knowledge of the law
I certainly do.
in cases like this?
I certainly do.
How long would you be in prison, Nannie?
Well, I spent it for life.
Would you ever get out?
I hope.
What would you do if you get out?
I would take my daughter's children and put them all four together and try to raise them.
What sort of a living would you try to make? What would you do?
Well, I don't know anything except in housekeeping and farm work.
What do you do over in the women's side of the prison?
I work in laundry,
Iron? What?
ironing, washing.
Does that pay you any money?
No, sir. Except in when I wash for the girls.
If you could say something to people on the outside, say a mother who has a teenage daughter, what would you tell her about raising that daughter?
I tell her to go to church and keep her close by.
You think love is important today?
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Nannie Doss.
too.
Nannie died of leukemia in the hospital ward of Oklahoma State Penitentiary in 1965, and she never stopped searching for her perfect love, writing to suitors whilst she was imprisoned. 4 confessed murders and at least 8 that were still under investigation. What could have caused Nannie to commit such hideous crimes? With some of these being her own small children, her grandchildren, her mother and her sister. Was it the head injury as a small child that she didn't get medical attention for that could have caused this? She moved so openly and innocently without any seeming deception. She showed no guilt, no remorse, so much so that she was never questioned, although victims dropped around her like flies. Did she commit even more crimes? After all these years, the answers may never be known. But I would love to know what your thoughts are. Do you think Nannie killed the others or just her 4 hubbies? Leave me your comments in the comment section down below. I always love reading what you think. Thank you so much for spending time and watching this video. Please remember to leave a like and subscribe if you have not done so already. It's a free way that you can help me out. Until next time, stay safe out there, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Bye!